So in some of the other review videos, you would have seen this graph where it shows a decline in public support for the Vietnam War. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the events that led to the decrease in this period of the war, specifically 1968. So there was a lot going on in 1968 that caused people to not support the war any longer. One of those was the Tet Offensive. So if you recall that Tet is the Vietnamese New Year, and so there was a ceasefire or a truce for that day, which is pretty common during war for like big holidays and events. They'll agree to stop killing each other and then resume after the holiday is over. So there was a truce at that point. However, the VC launched a massive, like, coordinated attack that the US was not prepared for. The US ends up like holding off the VC. Like the VC doesn't gain control of any more area, so it's a military victory for the US, but it's considered a psychological loss, meaning that it's 1968. The US has been involved in this war for years. The government keeps telling the troops and American citizens that the war is going well, that the VC are about to be defeated, and then the VC organized this massive attack over like hundreds of different locations in South Vietnam at once. So this really shakes Americans' faith in the US's ability to defeat the VC. A lot of morale lost among American soldiers. They think like this is ridiculous. We're never going to defeat them. They're never going to stop. This idea of a war of attrition is not possible. And then a lot of Americans at home felt like this was a lost cause. The impact is that the media, after the Tet Offensive, is openly speaking out against U.S. involvement in the war. This is new. We talked previously about the fact that there was a lot of footage from the war that was on the nightly news, but reporters weren't speaking against the war early on. They were simply reporting on the events of the war. Now, after the Tet Offensive, you have reporters and news anchors saying, like, what are we even doing here? Um, Johnson, who was president and initially escalated U.S. involvement in the war, decides not to run for re-election in 1968, which is actually a huge deal. An incumbent president is more likely to win. So the person who's already been in power for 4 years is more likely to win another term because people are familiar with them, especially when the country is involved in a conflict because they want consistency. You're in the middle of a war, you don't want a new commander in chief coming in and like picking up where somebody else was already leaving off. So it's very unusual to not run if you're an incumbent president, especially during a time of war. Nixon then takes his place. So you can see the picture there is of Richard Nixon. And the reason he wins is because he promised the American people that he was going to end the war in Vietnam. And we'll talk more about his plan in the Vietnamization review video.